All right, everybody. We bring in a very special guest. We've got Connor Hayden, the host of the Corn Crazed podcast. Connor, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. And today we're talking all kinds of college football, getting ready for the college football season to start up. It's a very exciting time for college football fans because we know that every new season means new opportunities, and just about every team has high hopes for their team going into the season. To bring you on, I know you're a big Nebraska guy, of course, the Corn Craze podcast talking all about Nebraska. So I figured we'd kind of pick your brain on Nebraska and the Big Ten.
Yeah, great idea. I've got a lot to share, so this is good
Yeah, yeah.
timing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and start off with your Cornhuskers. My brother is a Cornhusker fan, so is my dad. So I'm surrounded by them. I live right on the border there of Sioux City, so I'm right on the border across from all of these Nebraska fans all over out here in the Midwest. And there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of buzz going around that looking at Matt Rule, that he is the guy. Do you feel like Matt Rule has shown enough in the process of this first offseason as a first-time head coach there in Lincoln? First time at Lincoln, I should say. But do you think he's shown enough to show that maybe he can step in to be that guy to kind of be the redemption story for Nebraska?
Yeah, he represents the qualities that Nebraska fans were looking for in a coach. And I think there were a lot of question marks before he had gotten hired because he had just come off a rough stint in Carolina. But we know he's done it before. And because he's done it before and there's proof in college, that gives you a little bit more confidence. Then you look at everything he's done in the offseason. He took a recruiting class that was struggling a little bit when Scott Frost had gotten fired. And he was able to revamp it and pull some guys in who fit for what he's trying to build. Then you look at the future recruiting class. He's already got him up to, I think, 21st nationally. He landed some of the best players in the state who honestly weren't going to come. It didn't look like Carter Nelson, Davon Hall, Daniel Kalen. All those were big names who were pretty much set on going to either the SEC or Notre Dame. So I think the hope comes because you've got the recruiting proof. Now you've got this coach who speaks like a Nebraskan. He talks to what we want to hear. He talks about the fullback. He talks about establishing the run game, winning in the Big Ten the right way, because there are ways to win in this conference. And Scott Frost never really figured that out. So yeah, I think he's shown enough this offseason that we can say, okay, here are 4 or 5 points that make us believe that this guy's legitimate and not just another big name who you're paying a lot of money to, like a Mel Tucker.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you look at what he has done, like you said, recruiting alone has been a big game changer. And the way that he's been recruiting, he's been on the trails, hitting it hard and trying to go after guys. I also think he's gone really well in the transfer portal, getting guys. If you can draw guys from Georgia, that's not a bad place to be stealing them from.
Yeah, no doubt. And when you look at the transfer portal from last year, there was so much excitement and hype for Casey Thompson and some of the other guys that they were able to pull in on defense, like Omar Brown. And it didn't feel like there was a plan to bring guys in who fit their system. They just went and tried to pull the best guys they could. Matt Rule went and found guys who fit for what he's trying to build. I know Corey Collier came from Florida. He didn't get to play there. Same with Chief Borders, but I think they fit for this 3-3-5, and they're lanky, they're fast. And because they fit the system, there's a better chance they're going to play. So I like the transfer portal strategy this year under Rule than what we saw in 2022.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And looking at just his mentality, like you said, I think he does fit the Nebraska role pretty well. I guess looking at the Huskers with their first year under Matt Rule going into this upcoming season, I think they have a favorable season when you look at their schedule, a favorable schedule, and it's a very good schedule to start off with. You're not having to go against a lot of the tough teams that you normally have loaded up in your Nebraska uh, roster, I guess, in the Big Ten there. So looking at the schedule, what do you think should be the expectation for Nebraska fans coming into Matt Rule's first year?
Yeah, I don't want to give a record prediction right now. I'm still doing my research on it, and I want to make sure that I give
Okay.
the best number I can, right? I think when we're talking about the expectations, I just dropped a video actually 30 minutes ago where I outlined some of the things that I think he needed to correct this offseason, and then some of the expectations we as fans should have. And some of the things I didn't mention in that video, which I think I can mention now, I think we're going to see better play calling and game management. I think we're going to see better tackling, better ball handling, and the fundamentals are going to be something that this coaching staff puts more emphasis on. The close games that we saw last year, I think, are going to flip from losses to wins. And I think that winning those close games is going to shift this record from a losing one to a bowl team, essentially. And I think ultimately, overall, else teams are going to start to take them seriously, because even if they start 3-2 with losses to Michigan, they would lose to Minnesota as well in that scenario. teams are going to look at Nebraska on their schedule and say, geez, this is a team who could beat us legitimately, not a team who's just going to be somebody who rolls over like they did in the past. They're not going to have the weak offensive and defensive line that we see fold. I think they're going to be a little bit tougher in the trenches. So I think it's a bowl team. I don't know exactly how many they're going to win. I do think if I was going to give a ceiling, there is 9-win potential. And it sounds ridiculous. And everyone's going to say, people just get hyped up in Nebraska every single year. But look at the schedule. I've got it pulled up right here. You've got Minnesota, who's regressing. You've got Colorado, who is taking a step forward, but they're a bottom feeder on the schedule. NIU, who's going to take a step forward, and Louisiana Tech as well, but neither of those teams should be able to compete in Lincoln. Michigan's the one team who you're not going to beat, most likely. But after that, Illinois regressing, Northwestern regressing, Purdue regressing, Michigan State, they're going to take a step forward, but how good can they be? Maryland, they lost a lot of guys. They brought some in the portal, but I don't see them as a team who's going to be a big problem when Nebraska plays them at home. You've got Wisconsin and Iowa, who are the two front runners for the Big Ten West, but both beatable. So I think this is a really favorable schedule. It's really exciting to be a Nebraska fan right now. And if Matt Rule could have had any draw, I think this is what he would have hand selected before he got hired.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's a schedule that you really want when you're coming in as a first year head coach. You want a schedule that can kind of build you up and kind of give you a better morale. I think morale is probably the best tool to use as a first year head coach. But let's jump around in the Big Ten real quick and kind of look at maybe a couple of the top dogs, the two that are really always going to be looked at as the top dogs for the Big Ten. And you look at Ohio State, Michigan. We'll start off over with Michigan just because I personally feel like I've got higher hopes for Michigan than Ohio State, just because you see what they've got returning. They have JJ McCarthy, who came off of a very hot ending to his year, beating Ohio State, and still didn't look bad at all in that game against TCU. I think he still put up pretty good numbers, and you can expect him to be working in the offseason to get to a better point this season with JJ McCarthy. And then of course you've got JJ McCorum and even Donovan Edwards, the two backs that are highly regarded in the Big Ten and across all college football. Getting all of that offensive power back, plus you didn't lose a whole lot on defense. I mean, what do you see with this Michigan team as far as what their ceiling could be and what they could be able to put together in the Big Ten this year?
Michigan's so odd because I think it now comes down to coaching, right? You've got a team who has now gotten to the playoff back-to-back years. They were uber talented in both situations. The key factor now is going to be JJ, and I think this will be his final season. He could be a first-round draft pick next year is what I've been reading. Their offensive line is solid. They brought in 3 guys from the portal who've all started at other schools. Like you said, you've got Blake Corum and you've got Donovan Edwards, who are both NFL-type running backs who could both win the Heisman if they were playing on different teams. So I think it comes down to what can this coaching staff draw up to figure out how to beat Ohio State again, because that's going to be a nightmare. Obviously, they got to play Penn State, who has a really strong defense. They got blown out last year, but I think they could be a team who fights. And then when you do get to the playoff scenario, is Penn State going to have the scheme to beat some of the big teams like a Georgia, Bama, whoever else is in there? Or do they fold again and they give up a big lead and they can't pick up the pieces at the end? I don't know. I think that's a coaching question, though.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you're right, because it ultimately does come down to what's your coaching going to do, because there is no question about what kind of talent they've got there. Definitely a powerhouse when it comes to the talent that they've been able to surround themselves with. But then you jump over in that rivalry against Ohio State. I feel like it usually comes down to who's going to make it to the Big Ten championship game, just by that big game that we all watched there in the last game of the season. And with Ohio State, it does look a lot different than what we're seeing with Michigan, where Michigan is returning a lot of pieces. Ohio State's having to fill a lot of pieces. They're going to have to fill the position of one of their number one wide receivers. And I say one of just because I feel like they've always got a number one receiver hiding somewhere in there. And we see it. Their number one receiver this year was obviously shining big time last year in Marvin Harrison Jr., but losing CJ Stroud, so you're losing a quarterback. That's a big piece of not just your offense, but your entire team. What do we look at over at Ohio State on the other side of that rivalry? What do we see with Ohio State? Do we think that they can still piece together a team to still have that 11-win season and make it to the playoffs and maybe redeem themselves from last year?
Yeah, I think every year Ohio State's going to win 10 games, right? They're still in the peak for Ryan Day, and I don't think they're going to fall off and go down to 9 wins or 8 wins or have some issue just because they're flipping quarterbacks. We saw CJ Stroud struggle in his first year. He wasn't great, and he lost the game early to Oregon at home. Could we see the same scenario this year? They have to play at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame now has a really good transfer quarterback who came in, and Sam Hartman, and they want revenge for last year. So, and again, they're a team who's on the up and up. They've had their coach now for a couple of years. So I think the Notre Dame game could be somewhere they slip, the Michigan game, obviously, and then they got to play Penn State. The offensive line has to be rebuilt a little bit. The quarterback room, like we talked about, but all of their skill on offense stays the same. Their defense is now in their second year under their DC, who came over from Oklahoma State, and he wasn't elite last year, but their defense was serviceable in most situations. The coaching isn't really as much of a question as I think it is at Michigan. It's more so which elite players can step up on the line and at quarterback, and who's going to make that biggest impact to get them back to where they've been for these last few years, which is in the playoff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was talking about Ohio State earlier today, and just looking at who we know that Ohio State is. Like you said, I don't really see them falling under 10 wins, even in a season where they're having to rebuild a little bit as far as, like I said, quarterback position being the central part of your offense. But it's just funny when you look at Ohio State in years when they had their top two quarterbacks get hurt and still made it to the national championship and win it with a third string quarterback, and seeing how packed full they are there. And then on top of that, even on years where Joe Burrow, who is a one of the best quarterbacks to have ever done it statistically, even he isn't able to play at Ohio State, goes on to win a national championship somewhere else, and seeing just all the talent that they're constantly putting out. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I don't think there's too much to worry about for Ohio State fans, even though I think that they don't realize a good thing when they've got it, I guess, even though they're calling for Ryan Day. But I think that'd be a silly mistake. But to look at another team in the Big Ten right now that's got a new head coach, a head coach that I've got a lot of hope for. I think he's got a lot to be able to work with there, and that's over at Wisconsin. Looking at Luke Fickell, first year at Wisconsin, I know that a few people, including myself, would probably pick Wisconsin as one of those sleeper teams that could make it to the Big Ten championship game, mainly because of the schedule that they face, and because we know what the transfer portal has done for them, and we know what their head coach is capable of. Do you see Wisconsin being one of those teams that could surprise everybody, making it to that Big Ten championship and putting up a fight this year?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it's a surprise. I think they're a preseason top 25 team, and I think that they have a quarterback who's done it now for years. Their coach has proven it multiple times now that he's been at Cincinnati, and he was at Ohio State before. So he shows that he can coach elite talent. I don't think they're going to have a struggle getting back to where they should be. I think the only question is, what's the offense going to look like? Because they brought in North Carolina's OC who likes to throw the ball. So that's going to be a little funky. But outside of that, we know it's proven on all levels, coaching, player wise. Speaking of players, they bring back 10 starters on offense. I think they bring back 7 or 8 on defense. They have the best running back in the country in Braylon Allen. I mean, they're loaded everywhere. I don't think they're going to have any trouble getting to the Big Ten championship. And if I had to put a bet on it, I think that's who I would pick right now.
Yeah, yeah, and I like it. And honestly, I would like the chances of looking at Wisconsin. Let's say that they go against Michigan or Ohio State, who obviously is the favorite to go to it from the East. I wouldn't put it past Luke Fickell to surprise everybody and be able to maybe walk in there with maybe 10 wins, but still upset somebody in the Big Ten championship game. It's not something I would necessarily put my money on, just because I know how powerful both of those programs can be, but definitely something to look at. And like you said, too, bringing in a couple of quarterbacks with them from the transfer portal, one directly from Oklahoma, and then their starter, they're most likely going to be starter in Tanner Mordecai, came from Oklahoma, but then transferred to SMU. And just knowing that he comes from Oklahoma and who he got recruited by says quite a bit about him. Tanner Mordecai getting recruited by Lincoln Riley, who's known as a QB whisperer for sure.
And you can just look at his stats. His stats have shown what he has the potential to do. And any questions there were in spring and people trying to say Tanner Mordecai might not live up to what they had hoped they had gotten, I think that's all kind of BS. He's going to be a stud there. The other thing is, I think if Nebraska wouldn't have gotten Rule, the second choice would have been Fickell. So that's going to be interesting to watch over these next few years. Who turns their program around faster? Who gets them to the mountaintop? And who's the coach who ends up being the superior coach? I think is the question that we're all looking to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was definitely one of them that was high up on my list for coaches looking around the nation. I know a lot of people were kind of hoping that Luke Fickell would have been the guy if it wasn't going to be Urban Meyer, I suppose. But
Yep.
yeah, but you're right. It does bring up a not just a battle of the two teams, but battle of the two coaches to see which new coach can really put something together faster. I think that'll be a lot of fun to look at and to watch that kind of burn into a maybe a fan rivalry rather than an actual rivalry, because I'm sure both coaches are probably rooting for each other in some fashion, just not whenever they're going against each other.
Yeah, you want your other coaches in your conference to be good because you want to beat the best guys, right? So I know they're rooting
Yeah.
for each other to be successful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And looking into the Big Ten, I think there's other teams that we could talk about, like Penn State, and the amazing program that they are probably always going to have. It seems like even in their down years, it was really just because trying to find the right coach to fill in for one of the greatest that they've ever had, and I guess the greatest they've ever had. But Penn State has definitely brought themselves back up. I think they're another team to consider. But whenever we look at some of the great programs that have come out of the Big Ten and made it the Big Ten championship, we look over at Michigan State, a great program historically, but last year it seems like they took a very big step back. And you mentioned them just a minute ago, talking about the Nebraska the schedule. And you believe that they're going to have a little bit of a bounce back. How much of a bounce back do you think Michigan State is able to have?
Well, I think that they're in a better position to succeed now because they have their transfer portal players who've been there now for a couple of years. They've been developing the guys who they've been recruiting straight out of high school. Now you're in Tucker's third season. They lost a lot of talent and they lost some depth. And I think last year they lost their identity because you had Kenneth Walker back in 2021. And Kenneth Walker was a guy who ran their entire team, right? He was their entire offense. I think he had a couple of games where he went for over 200. So he obviously became a really good running back in the NFL. So yeah, I think they're going to find that their identity is more of a balanced attack. They're going to figure out if their quarterback has it in him to throw the ball around. And if he does, they've got Malik Carr at tight end. And I'm sure they're going to find some other receivers because it seems like they always have receiver talent. It's just who's going to be the stud who pops out now that Keon Coleman and Jaden Reed are both gone.
Yeah, and looking at the contract that Mel Tucker got to, I'm sure Michigan State, the administration anyways, is just really hoping that this can be the year that he finally bounces something around. I think he's going to have to do something pretty big to really make them happy.
The contract never made sense. I think what happened with the contract was they got nervous because so many big name coaches, Lincoln Riley, for example, were getting these massive max contracts like NBA
Mm-hmm.
players. And because they were handing these contracts out left and right, you had to make sure if you had a coach who could be poached, you wouldn't let him get taken from you. So they were in a position where do we roll the dice on Mel Tucker and say we're going to commit to him for the long run? Or do we let someone else take him? Because that's ultimately what would have happened. A Nebraska could have come in, for example, and just like they did with Matt Rule, given him the same amount of money that Mel Tucker got. So, or that Michigan State offered him. So
Mm-hmm.
I think they took a massive risk, but they said, we're going to buy in and live with him for a while. So hopefully it pans out. But he hadn't done anything up to this point to deserve that outside of one big year with Kenneth Walker. Before that,
Mm-hmm.
he was a DC. He had coached in the NFL. He had been at Colorado where they didn't really do anything. So yeah, it was a risk they were willing to take for whatever reason. And yeah, we'll see if it pans off in the next 3 to 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And a newer coach, I think he's going in his third year, if I remember correctly. I didn't pull that up to double check myself, but looking over at Illinois and Brett Bielema, what he's been able to do there. Of course, the Big Ten knows Brett Bielema. They know that what he's capable of. Talking about Wisconsin just a moment ago, he did great there whenever he was over there and working with Wisconsin as a head coach. But now going to Illinois, I think last year he really showed up and showed that he can bring Illinois of all teams in the Big Ten to be a team to fight against, and a team not to just look at lightly and just kind of breeze right past them, but they can be a powerhouse, at least a powerhouse to maybe upset some big teams here and there along the way. And he shows his defensive identity a lot, and he brings back that same style that I think succeeded at Wisconsin whenever he was there. With Brett Bielema over at Illinois, I guess what can people kind of look around for from Illinois going forward? Do you think that he's going to keep on building on what he had from last season, or do you think maybe he starts to take a step back?
Okay, so I think record wise, they take a step back. However, I think that they're going to build and become a better team as the years go on. Brett Bielema
Okay.
is a Big Ten coach, the epitome of a Big Ten coach. He focuses on the
Yeah.
trenches, he focuses on defense and running the football. He knows how to find the right running backs and develop them. He got lucky with his running back last year, who was a stud. He had some really good defenders on the back end, especially a DB. The one question mark now is he lost so much on offense, and well, outside the receiver, he lost his starting quarterback and his starting running back, a couple guys in the offensive line. But on defense, they lost their DC, who you got to credit Walters to what he was able to do, because it was only 2 years, I think, since that coaching staff got hired. And he was able to take a defense who was really whatever and turn them into one of the better defensive backfields in the entire country. With Walters being gone, with Bielema losing his running back and his quarterback, having to replace so much in those skill positions, is he going to be able to win 8 games? Because 8 games would be a step forward, right? 7 games would be similar to last year, and then 6 would be technically regression. I'm going to guess they win 6 this year. I think they lose to Kansas, because I think they play that one on the road early, and Kansas is one of the best teams, in my opinion, when it comes to the Big 12. So I say best teams, but I think they're in the upper echelon, maybe the fourth or fifth best team. But still, I think they're a solid team with 10 returning starters on offense and I think 8 on defense. Anyway, I don't want to get down the rabbit hole. The point is, Illinois is going to have some struggles. They aren't going to be able to win every single game like they did last year, where they just dominate and punish teams with their run game. I think they're going to have to figure out some different ways to win. And yeah, we'll see if they can get to 6. But long-term vision for them is 8, 9 win consistently. And that would be incredible for Illinois.
Yeah, and I feel like if you're an Illinois fan, you have to be pretty happy with that overall, especially looking up from what your program came from. I think that's something you can be pretty content with overall, and kind of building from there. But
yeah,
I guess I know you said you didn't make any predictions yet. I guess, are you okay with making a Big Ten championship prediction?
2 teams I think will be in the championship game.
Yeah, or even just a champion overall, if you prefer to just pick one champion.
I think that's too easy, right? I think we got to say, man, it's really who wins the Michigan Ohio State game. So I think I'll say Michigan wins in that Ohio State game, which means they represent the East. In the West, I got to take Wisconsin or Iowa. It really comes down to schedule, where they play each other, when they play each other, because I think that game will determine the West champion. I would say Nebraska has a better chance to beat Iowa than they do Wisconsin this year. And because of that, I'll put Wisconsin, because Nebraska might be the team who decides that. So I'll put Wisconsin in the championship game. Michigan wins it. Wisconsin ends up as a 9 or 10 win team and in a really good bowl game. And Michigan is back to the playoff.
I like it. Do you have a dark horse of who could make it to the Big Ten championship?
Dark horse? I mean,
maybe not to win it all, but maybe just to make it there.
I would say Nebraska. I really believe in Nebraska this year, and I think they might finish ahead of Purdue, Illinois, Minnesota. And if they do, that could put them in a position where they got to beat Wisconsin or Iowa. And if the cards fall the right way, they could end up right in there. It's a long shot, but it's possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I like kind of throwing it out there too. Like, oh, let's pick a dark horse and see who might be able to squeeze their way in.
Last year, I would say that Minnesota or Purdue would have been my dark horses based on all the talent they had returning, but they're going to regress this year, in my opinion. So yeah, Nebraska.
Yeah, I liked Purdue a lot last year, and I agree with you. I think they're kind of take a step back. I don't really like their coaching hire that they got in either, and so we'll have to see where everything goes. But it's going to be an exciting season. Connor, we thank you so much for coming on. But tell everybody where we can find your stuff.
Yeah, you can just go on YouTube, type in Corn Crazed, or type in my name, Connor Hayden, and you will find a bunch of content, me talking about Nebraska football, Big Ten football. I have a secondary channel where I talk about sports betting called Bro Throw. It's my biggest sponsor. So that's obviously fun for me, because I love to talk about betting on all these games every week. So I've got a bunch of content out there you can find if you search up my name.
Absolutely. Well, Connor, again, thanks so much for coming on and talking a little bit of Big Ten football with us.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon.